Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs, and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
My name is Michael English. I'm the director of the Peace, Conflict, and Security program here at the University of Colorado Boulder, and it is my pleasure to be with you this morning. So for recording purposes, today is Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. It is 9 a.m., and this is panel number 18144, titled Social Movements in a Changing World. So I've got some stuff to read here before we get started and before I introduce the panel. The University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, would like to honor, recognize, and acknowledge the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, and supporting student success and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. Before we get started with the panel, I am going to talk about how we're going to do questions and answers. If you are a CWA regular, you will know how this goes. But what we are doing is a Q&A system. We are typically going to reserve, I'm going to say most of the time, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, and I'll ask one or two questions, but if you would like to ask a question, we are going to ask that you raise your hand, and one of our producers will bring you a note card and a pencil. They will then collect that note card from you and bring it to me. You are welcome to raise your hands as early as you would like so that we can start getting questions, and I know the audience usually has pretty good questions for our panelists, so I am happy to spend as much time as possible on those. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to offer an introduction of our panelists. You can read full bios on the CWA website. So these will be somewhat short, and then they will have a few minutes to offer some introductory remarks. So we will get going with that. So I'm just going to do this in alphabetical order. Our first panelist, Wisdom Cole, is the Senior National Director of Advocacy for the NAACP. In his previous role as National Director for the NAACP Youth and College Division, he served more than 700 youth councils, high school chapters, and college chapters actively involved in the fight for civil rights. As kind of Wisdom's work pertains to this particular panel, he brings extensive experience in civil rights advocacy, Training Institute, electoral action training, grassroots organizing, issue toolkits, and webinars at the local, state, and national levels. He has managed national campaign efforts focused on building Black political power through youth leadership, development, advocacy, and direct action organizing for the past 5 years with the NAACP. And Wisdom is from California, or grew up in California. He earned a BA in chemistry with a minor in STEM education from UC Santa Cruz, as well as an MA in teaching from the University of San Francisco. Our second panelist is John Heffernan. John is the president of the Foundation for Systemic Change. He has over 30 years of experience in development, human rights, rule of law, democracy and governance, humanitarian relief, and post-conflict reconstruction projects in the United States, Africa, South America, Asia, and Europe. He served as the executive director of Robert F. Kennedy's Human Rights Speak Truth to Power. Senior, yes. We probably should work that in there, CWFX. He was the director of Genocide Prevention Initiative at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where he established the Genocide Prevention Task Force. He was a senior investigator with Physicians for Human Rights, chief of party for the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs in Guyana, South America, founder and executive director of the Coalition of International Justice, and committee representative for the former Yugoslavia and Sudan for the International Rescue Committee. Importantly for this panel, he was also trained as a community organizer by Fred Ross, and he currently serves as the board chair for the Disability Rights International Educators Instituted for Human Rights, and is on the board of Social Documentary Network, and he has got a documentary he will hopefully tell us about. Jose Marichal, our third panelist, is a CU Political Science Boulder alum. He is professor of political science at California Lutheran University, where his work focuses on how algorithms and artificial intelligence reshape social and political institutions. He's got a forthcoming book, You Must Remain an Algorithmic Problem, coming out on Bristol University Press. And this work examines the unspoken social contracts we form with algorithms that influence our perceptions and decisions. His next project, Machine Liberalism, explores how technological advancements redefine expectations for liberal democracy, and I think is going to be pertinent to thinking about how social movements interact with technologies this morning. So welcome, all our panelists. Thanks for being here. All right, so as I said, I'm going to give each of the panelists about 3 to 4 minutes to do some opening remarks. Then I'll start with questions, and if you have questions, just a reminder, start raising your hand, and our producers will be around to give you a note card. I think I'm just going to start first with Jose, and we'll work down the line.
Okay, so first of all, great honor to be here. It's nice to be back in Boulder, to being up here instead of, I was in the seats 25 years ago when I was a student, so it's really nice to be able to share this experience with you all. So I've been teaching technology and politics for, gosh, over almost 20 years now. I think my first class on the internet and politics was in 2008. And one of the advantages of being an old timer, right? An older timer, it's, you know, the trade-off for the shoulder bursitis and the, you know, is seeing sort of the evolution of technology and its impact on democracy and in movements. And I know a couple panels I've been on talk about imposter syndrome. So, you know, as I'm not an activist, I'm not an organizer, so there's a little bit of a imposter syndrome about me talking about organizing and social change with people who are on the ground in the trenches doing social change. But I can talk a little bit about, theoretically, about what I think technology, the role that technology has played and will play going forward in terms of the ability to enact social change. Around 2008, 2009, 2010, everybody was really excited about the potential for social change. You remember it was going to, there was a great Yale law professor, Yoshi Binkler, who talked about social change would lower transaction costs. So it would be easier to find people to generate a movement around. I wrote a book a long time ago, maybe too early, in 2012, about Facebook. And one of the things I found in that book is that people would use the Facebook political groups, not necessarily explicitly for activism, but just to find like-minded others, right? They'd say, I'm angry about this. Are you angry too? You join the group. And then through the discussions and through the communications, it'd be like this, what we might call a Slack latent capacity that could then be mobilized and activated, right? A bunch of people getting together on Facebook or X or Blue Sky or whatever, that's not a movement. That's the potential, right? That's the capacity for a movement. Organizers have to come in and then, you know, do something with that capacity. And you know, as you go through the early 2010s, you know, you have all the democracy movements around the world, the Green Revolution in Iran, the movements in Tunisia, in different parts of the world that were really, really motivated by social media, right? So, you know, the Green Revolution in Iran wouldn't have happened without Twitter, right? Because authoritarian governments hadn't really figured out how to control that. So people would use social media to communicate with each other, to sort of also gain strength from each other, to know that I'm not alone in this, right? So I think that was the democratic value of social media. And even in things that are even not so pertinent, like the ice bucket challenge, or things that would just like build community, build interest, raise awareness about campaigns. We could talk about the misdirected resources. Maybe that particular, I think it was ALS, got more money than they probably even know what to do with from the ice bucket challenge, right, in terms of research. But so there's a lot, and that really didn't change even after 2016, because you still had, you know, movements like the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement, and movements that use social media to mobilize, to spread memes. One of the things that motivated around Ferguson and Michael Brown was students at freshman orientation at Howard University who did who all put their hands up, and that became sort of the movement, the icon for the movement for a good period of time, especially at the beginning of the movement. So as we're moving forward, and we've moved forward into the modern era, we start looking at, oh gosh, you know, there are also dark sides to social media. There are also dark sides to mobilization. And one of the things that I think is we're kind of reckoning with now is that you could think about social movement as an energy, right? As you know, crowds, you know, there's this great theorist, Kennedy, who talked about the power of crowds, that we overcome our sort of resistance to the stranger and the other by grouping together, by mobilizing together. And so it's a powerful force, and it's part of the human condition, right? Coming together, being in community, being in solidarity is just part of something that's innate in us, I believe. But that energy has to go somewhere, right? And so what I think social media, and not necessarily social media's activism, just our culture of social media, our consumer culture, has created in us expectations of immediacy, right? Amazon, I can get it tomorrow, right? So when people are like, oh, why are you, it comes the next day, I need it tomorrow, I can get it tomorrow from Amazon. So I think our social media culture has created this culture of immediacy, but our liberal democratic institutions are not based on immediacy, right? So if Amazon and YouTube, I can get the movie now. I don't have to go to a movie theater. I can get it now. The American political system in particular is not oriented around that. That it's oriented around slow consensus building, majoritarianism, elements that take time and where you don't exactly get what you want. In fact, it's designed to not get what you want. It's designed to slow down what you want, right? This is an intro to American politics, but when we talk about it to 18-year-olds, we talk about Hamilton and the senatorial saucer. The Senate was designed to slow the passions of the masses. The House of Representatives is the people's branch. The Senate is the one that's supposed to slow it. So it's designed to slow things down. And in a culture where everything else is rooted around immediacy, we begin to lose trust in institutions that can't respond quickly. Many political theorists have said this is the problem with democracy, right? Carl Schmitt in the 1930s. The problem with liberal democracy is that it requires everybody to be heard. It makes it difficult to arrive at decision, right? And people want decisionism. And so we may be in the moment we are now in politics because a lot of people said, hey, that guy says he's gonna fix things. Decisionism, right? Like somebody's gonna break through the noise and the clutter of democracy and actually like arrive at decision. So in that respect, I think that our technology, where we are, the immediacy, the marketing of the immediacy, you can get exactly what you want when you want it, has created serious challenges for our set of political institutions that are designed to slow things down, to deliberate, right? To everybody doesn't get exactly what they want. So, all right, I'm going to stop there because I'm sure I'm way past 5 minutes. So,
Excellent. Wisdom, go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. I said, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
That's what I'm talking about. It's great to be some in the room. I'll ask that question again. Where are the fighters for freedom? Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. That is a question that keeps me up at night. That is a question that I think about currently in this moment in time as we are facing an onslaught of issues of just across the board. When we think about the history of social movements and myself as a student of social movements, I think about the need for political education, right? I came into the movement for organizing around 2011 when I went to UC Santa Cruz. Working with young people, working with students, working with other young people in the state of California, I was part of my Black Student Union. And people kept asking me, is your Black Student Union politicized? Is your Black Student Union politicized? I didn't know what that meant. I was like, what do you mean are we politicized? We meet once a week, we talk about pertinent issues, we create community, but are you politicized? Are you working to transform the lived conditions of students on your campus? Are you working to transform the lived conditions of people in your community? Are you working to transform the lived conditions of people in your state? And so on and so forth, right? And how do you build power from the local level to the federal level? Now these were large questions that an 18-year-old couldn't answer, right? But in my journey through organizing and activism, I really had the honor and privilege to learn from a lot of our elders in the movement. UC Santa Cruz has a phenomenal history of activism that I didn't even know about when I went there at first. Lupi Newton got his PhD in the history of consciousness. That was part of our required reading to be a part of our Black Student Union. In addition to that, Angela Davis was a professor emeritus at UC Santa Cruz, a professor of mine that I had the opportunity to interact with and talk to and ask these questions. For those who are familiar with the Bay Area, there's a deep history of the Black Panther Party in that area that stretched down to UC Santa Cruz. And in my search for politicization, I joined a statewide organization called the African Black Coalition, which I later found out was a Black Panther Party program to educate college students on how to organize, build, and advocate, right? These are things that you learn from talking to your elders, from talking to people who can understand the span of organizing and advocacy over a period of time. In my journey, right, recognizing and learning from elders in the Black Panther Party, you believe that the Black Panther Party started in Oakland, California. Well, as I grew in my advocacy, my organizing, and started doing national work with the NAACP, I learned that the Black Panther Party didn't start in Oakland, California. It started in Lowndes County, Alabama, where it was vote Democrat, vote Republican, vote Black Panther. Folks ask, why did they use the symbol of the Black Panther? Well, during that period of time, there was a lot of people who were illiterate. They couldn't define a political party. So when they went to the voting booth, they said, look for the symbol of a Black Panther. That is the symbol that represents the interests and needs of your people, right? So recognizing the stretch of time, right, and how things have influenced people from the South to the West Coast, and that grew to support a free breakfast program that we still benefit from today. In my experience, having the opportunity to work in an intergenerational organization like the NAACP, working in youth spaces, it's important for us to bridge the gap and understand from the past to move to the present. Part of my own philosophy within organizing and advocacy is this principle of Sankofa. Sankofa is a principle that means for us to move forward, we have to look back. I think in this period of time, it's really important for us to study from our elders, to look back, to understand how movements have grown, have died, because what's going on right now, particularly when we're thinking about young people in organizing and advocacy, they are being pushed in multiple different directions, right? There's this question of, is the movement becoming more conservative? Who is our leaders in these movements? We are seeing at a highly aggressive rate these organizations that were once here slowly fading away. The money that was there to support these organizations is no longer there. Our elders are asking these questions of us is, are we willing to go the distance in our organizing and advocacy without being paid, without having the right funding sources, right? Because when they were doing it, they didn't have grants to apply for. They didn't have research opportunities. They didn't have the different wealth of opportunities that we have in this moment in time to be able to fund the work. They did it because they had to do it to survive, right? At one point in time in America, it was illegal to be a member of the NAACP. I talked to many of my colleagues who come to this work because their family was a part of this organization, having grandfathers and grandmothers who were killed because they were the president of their branch, because they were a member of the NAACP, right? The question in this moment in time again is, where are my freedom fighters? How do I continue to grow that, train them, and make sure that they have the right political education to continue in this moment?
John, all you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. And can you hear me? Is this on? Yeah. What a great crowd, huh? At 9 o'clock in the morning. Thank you. For me, it's all about solidarity, right? It's all about how can we build this collective counterpower to combat whatever it is that we're focused on. I've been doing this work for a very long time, for 45 years or so, in various capacities. And it's interesting when I was listening, Michael, and thank you for reading my bio, that I've heard before, and it's interesting because it kind of went chronologically, and it made me realize, and I think the older I get, it makes life is circular, right? I mean, it got to the very bottom, and it said that yes, John was trained as a community organizer, and I was by this guy called Fred Ross that I'd love to be able to talk about in a bit, but that. And I realized that everything I've done in the last 45 years was really benefited from being trained at 22 years old as a community organizer. Everything that I've done. And it took me a while to really realize, and it really wasn't until starting to make this film that's called American Agitators, which really is about the power of grassroots organizing that can be enhanced by digital organizing, but it's really about these individuals that knock on doors and listen to problems, and this is what Fred Ross did in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s against fascism, against Nazism, against McCarthyism. He trained Cesar Chavez. He mentored Dolores Huerta. And I think the value of grassroots organizing in creating long-term systemic change, and this is a point that I'm sort of obsessed with of late, and that's because for 45 years, I've done work in various capacity, organizing, working on social movements, and so little progress has been made. And you kind of think it's just come around and whipped and hit me right in the butt, and you think, why is that? And I had an epiphany a couple years ago, and I think it's largely because, and to your point, Jose, it's largely because so much of the focus has been focused on quick fixes and not long-term systemic change. So I created this foundation to support causes that were about systemic change, largely because of what I wasn't able to do. It wasn't for lack of purpose or intention, even sometimes resources, but so little change in international or domestic has really been achieved. So this film is telling the story of how the power of grassroots organizing, but through the story of this guy Fred Ross, and how he created systemic change largely through the power of the vote, and how he was able to desegregate schools in places like Orange County, California. I also want to talk a little bit about what I mentioned before about what I call the power of how to combat a lot of these issues that we're faced with in this world through collective organized, collective counterpower is what I call it. A few years ago, I was struck by what was happening in this country vis-a-vis the total dismantling of public education through censoring, through restrictions of teachers, and we see it. And there was a panel on that, so I wish I had been on that panel. But I thought, wow, I have done a lot of work on warning signs, early warning signs. I worked at the U.S. Holocaust Museum and ran what was called the Committee on Conscience. And our goal was to give meaning to that phrase, never again. Haven't done a very good job, have we? But these early warning signs in 1935, Nazi Germany, in 1993, Rwanda, in 1992, Bosnia, are exactly what we're seeing today. And this isn't friggin' hyperbole. This is true in so many different sectors, but particularly education. And I thought to myself, where are my friends? You know, where are these human rights activists that I've worked with my entire life? Why aren't people focusing on what's happening vis-a-vis education in our country today? And so we came together, and a lot of organizations like yours and others were doing independently great work, and Hadar's back there at Penn, but why aren't we working together? And so we created this thing called the Right to Learn Coalition, and again, it was aimed to build this collective counterpower that I think is the only way that we can combat some very serious challenges in our country today. Thank you.
All right, so this is my reminder. Again, if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand, and one of the producers will bring you a note card to get that question in. I, of course, am going to take facilitator prerogative and ask my own questions first while those are being gathered. So I have to apologize to my panelists. I listened to their little speeches, and now I have new questions that are more interesting. We'll just go back down the line. Jose, you were talking a lot about technology. What I would like you to help us understand is why, and I deal with this, I teach a class on nonviolent civil resistance, and we all love technology. Why are we so naive to think that these technology companies, platforms, are in any way, shape, or form helpful to us? Right? I mean, somebody is profiting off of us. We could talk about the surveillance capitalism aspects, but why is it that we are so just kind of willing to say, like, hey, these are there, let's use them, rather than think about those consequences of using them? Easy question.
All of them are easy questions. Easy questions at this conference. I'm gonna admit that as much as I critique the Amazons and the YouTubes and the of the world, I still use them. Right? It's a path of least resistance. Right? Think about how, and I'm looking around. There are some students here, good students. Shout out to the students. But there's a lot of people here who remember a time before. Where your groceries would be delivered to your door, right? Where, I need food. I'm going to go to a supermarket, right? I'm going to go to a department store. One of the things that technology, algorithms are generally speaking designed to optimize, right? Designed to make things more efficient. There are pros and cons with efficiency. Because think about the pros and cons of your Amazon packages arriving at your door. Okay. Yes, you get the item. You don't have to leave your house. You get to control the things that you want to do in your house at that time, right? But at the same time, when you had to go to the supermarket, when you had to go to the hardware store or whatever, right? I'm old, hardware store. But when you had to go to these stores, you might have random conversations with people. You might run into a neighbor. Right? You might, just have there would be more spontaneity and inefficiency in your life that actually is vital to organizing, right? Community. I think, and the more I listen to discussions at this conference, community is the answer to a lot of our problems right now, right? The more you engage, the more you interact with your neighbors. I mean, this is the basis of, Fred Ross and community organizing. The more you interact with neighbors, the more you get involved and care about their lives. I mean, this is something, I've been teaching about this for years, right? It's like if you know your neighbors, you care about their fate, you care about their well-being. But in another dimension of it is that what algorithmic culture does is it breeds isolation, and the more isolated we are, the more likely we are to believe narratives that aren't true. We're under siege. We all have Ring cameras. Right? We all monitor, right? If we don't know who's knocking on our door, we don't answer. If we don't know who's calling us on the phone, we don't answer. Now that's good because there are a lot of scam telemarketers that are trying, and a lot of people are trying to. But the basis of community organizing is knocking on someone's door. How many people answer the door if you don't know who it is, right? The technology has kind of bred that. Well, good for you. No, send a community organizer to your house to find out. Anyway, so I think that's one of the big. That's one of the big reasons why we engage in these technologies is because we know, I don't think anybody here is unaware that your data is being collected and it's being used to train algorithms, to train AI. But because of the convenience, I think we have a great capacity for cognitive dissonance, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know. What are they going to know about me? I'm just a regular Joe Schmo. Who cares if they have all my data? I mean, what do they know? Like every data breaches, right? Everybody's data has been harvested and accessed, and probably everybody's social security number is out there on the internet, and we just kind of know it, but the packages arrive the next day, and I don't really want to go out for the food. I'd much rather have DoorDash deliver it to me, so.
Thank you. Wisdom, I got a different question for you, and it's one coming from some of our students, so it's echoed here, and I knew they were thinking about it. How am I going to frame this? We're going to frame this generically. Universities and student organizations sometimes disagree. How do students effectively leverage their power or resources on campuses to pressure universities, right? Because we are at a time in which universities are certainly making choices and students would wish them to do others. And I think these questions are geared towards really trying to understand how students can be more involved in their universities and use direct action in productive ways.
Is a great question. I really appreciate that. When I think about student organizing, particularly on campuses, particularly in this moment in time, right, where we are seeing an aggressive rollback on diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we are seeing students being picked up for no reason, right? We're seeing a real politicization of our college campuses and where our students stand, where our faculty stands, and where our administration stands. The best way I could answer this question is really thinking about a ladder of escalation, and just giving you from my own experience, right? When I was a student organizer on campus, I was a part of our Black Student Union. I was a part of our African Student Union. I was a part of our coalition space. I was a part of just so many. I was the residential advisor for our Rosa Parks African American Theme House. I was working with staff and faculty to build bridges and programs. I was doing all of this organizing work, right? This was the moment I realized, I don't know if I'm actually gonna go to medical school. Maybe I should look into a different career pathway. But I was doing all these things, and I felt like I was supporting my institution, and I graduated. And then the second I graduated, they're like, he's gone now. We're gonna go back to our regular scheduled program. And it was such a moment of clarity where it's like, the one thing that these universities have that students don't have is that they will wait you out, right? You are going to graduate and exceed and go on to these great jobs and go into the world and make a difference, and they can wait you out and continue to do the status quo, right? And so part of your work as a student organizer is, one, to build a ladder of leadership, right? Part of being a good organizer is making sure that you are not just the one. A movement isn't based on just one person making change. It's about a community, it's about a team, it's about training people, continuing to build back and reach back so that folks are able to continue the work that you leave off on. Now, when you are working to build power, there is a ladder of escalation. So it was amazing that on campus, when I was a student leader, I always made sure I had interns, right? People who could shadow me, people who could take notes, people who could understand what was going on in the rooms and the conversations I was having, and documenting that so they could use that in the future. Some of my interns continued the work after I graduated, and part of what they did was, hey, we're gonna sent a letter to our administration. This was asking for, they were working to get some funding dollars. They were working to have a Rosa Parks African American theme house space that was painted in Pan-African colors. They were working to ensure that Black students weren't only being recruited to these universities, but also being retained, right? Because that's a major flaw that we see in a lot of our higher education institutions, is that they will boast and brag about the amount of Black students that they recruit to their university, but how many are actually matriculating from those spaces. And so they were working for a series of demands, right? And in that, they sent a letter first, didn't receive a response. They asked for a meeting, they got a response and had that meeting. After the meeting again, they were trying to wait them out. From there, they picked up signatures from other organizations on campus, building a list of signatories, right? Building coalition, making sure that there are other organizations that are also in support of you. From there, they delivered those signatures to the administration. The administration still didn't listen, right? So they've gone through all of the civil manners of asking for what they needed. The university continued to ignore them. From there, they said, all right, we're going to sit in at the administration hall. From there, they got news attention. The university was getting a lot of backlash from board members, from angry parents, from folks who are paying to uphold this institution. From there, they were able to have that conversation with the administration, and administration actually followed through on those plans, right? Oftentimes, we see our student organizers want to jump all the way to the direct action. Sometimes it doesn't take direct action. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it is about the relationship that you are building with your university and the entities in those university spaces. If they are not listening to you, that's when you begin to continue to gradually increase your method of direct action. Another example from the University of, it was Minnesota. This was after the murder of George Floyd. The students there put together a toolkit called Cut the Contract, when they were looking into how their police budgets were being used on school. They had done surveys and data and talked to students, and they basically had realized that the police were policing the Black students on campus. They had explicit data about that they shared with their university, that they shared with their peers and other organizations, and again, built a list of supporters to say, hey, we need to reallocate this budget, right? Instead of putting millions of dollars into this police budget and paying for both on-campus and off-campus police to police their schools, we need to refund this to our community. We need to put this into retention and outreach programs. We need to put this into budget items that we can use for students to enhance themselves, right? And them being able to do that and making sure they had a wide array of people who supported them, right? There was even support out of the state from other students who had seen what they were doing. They were able to, without even direct action, get their university to comply, right? You know, I really, really want to stress that there's a process and a way for you to escalate your action so that you are not in a place where you are caught off guard. Because sometimes we like to jump all the way to the end when there are steps beforehand. And when we jump all the way to the end, that's when we need lawyers. That's when we get into litigation. That's when we get into other court battles, right? And we need to make sure that we are protected, because we have students who are on campus who are learning how to do this for the first time. And this is real, and it has real consequences, which we are seeing in real time right now. And so I really urge folks to think about that practice of escalation.
Awesome. Wisdom, thank you. John, I've got a...
Wait, can I ask Wisdom a question?
Go for it.
Yeah, am I screwing things up here? I'm curious, and I don't know whether you followed these students or not, but particularly the most active students, and whether they have taken that activism, that knowledge that they learned in school on, working on various issues to later on in life in terms of what they do, or is it sometimes where they just move on, they get busy, they have jobs, and...
Yeah, it's a mix, right? I think the ones who understand the structure and organizing and thinking about this as like a way of life, and understanding the power. You talked about how organizing and advocacy takes so long. It's a marathon, not a sprint, right? And those who are okay and understand that victory is won an inch by an inch, and understand that it may take some time and that there are ways to do this not only at your administration level or your campus level, but on the local, the state, and the federal level. Those are the ones that I see retained most often. I think what happens is that there's this myth that is told to young people that organizing is just for a season, that it's something you do in college. You know, college is where you get all liberal and you go to a protest and you riot and do all these different things. But clearly from the careers that we have chosen, you know, there's an opportunity to do this on the professional level, to do this on the federal level, to be able to actually move institutions. You know, within my career, I've had an uncanny amount of success around student debt cancellation, which was a fight that started a long time before I even had student debt, right? A lot of what we're doing as organizers is connecting and furthering movements that have already started, right? Again, we've been here before, right? There was a Third World Liberation Front where folks were working to organize about what was happening outside of America, right? You see young people in this moment in time very invested in foreign policy. When I was in college, we weren't thinking about foreign policy like that. We were thinking about the lived material conditions that were happening on campus. And so I think part of it is, how do we support students to create some type of pipeline for young organizers who are in these organizations, student groups, to also see us and be in careers and shadow us and intern with us and understand how what you're doing on your campus level is practicing democracy, right? You're practicing democracy on a local level where you can understand what it looks like on a federal or state level.
Thanks.
Okay, so wisdom took us to a perfect place, John, for multiple questions that have come in around this question of voting as a vehicle for change. And I'm just going to give you a few things here to maybe work with, and then I'll use this as an opportunity to let Wisdom and Jose also respond, and we'll open it up to lots of questions. But is that still true, right? Should movements be organizing in such a way where voter turnout is the goal of what your movement is doing, and therefore using movements to pressure change through the ballot box? And of course, the responses I have here are concerned with, you know, what happens when we have black and brown people being disenfranchised and purged from voter rolls, as well as a more general concern with, you know, what happens when or if democracy no longer exists in the United States. What do you think, John? Answer.
Wow, that's a tall order. Yes, I think voting is critical. And yes, there is voter suppression in a big way, right? But the power of the vote, and we've seen it over and over and over again, is really phenomenal. But it can go the other way. And so I think it requires a lot of education. I ran a project in Guyana, South America, where there's a huge ethnic divide between Indo-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese. And the U.S. government, this was USAID funded, or formerly USAID, I guess, you know, felt strongly that the way that you support democratic institutions is through voting. And so they supported, we had a big project on guaranteeing you know, free and fair elections in Guyana, and in combination, in partnership with the Carter Center. And so we had this vote, and it was free and fair, but everybody voted according to their ethnicity. So it just perpetuated this ongoing conflict in Guyana. So in that instance, you know, the vote, I think, you know, was concerning, and it didn't end up producing something that we had hoped would in terms of, you know, a strong democracy, and it just continued this kind of ethnic divide that was incredibly damaging for society. But I do think that voter education in this country and in other places around the world, in terms of getting it out, letting people know about the suppression, letting people know that there are certain places where the minority vote is almost impossible, just quite literally, because geographically it can't get to the polls. So no, I mean, I am a huge proponent, and if anybody wants to see this movie, it really shows you that there is the power of the vote, and we have seen it historically. And yes, we can be disillusioned by what just happened, but that doesn't mean that we can't turn things around with the vote.
John, they want to know also where they can see the documentary.
Oh, man, that's a great question. We just won Best Documentary at the Cinequest San Jose Film Festival, which is kind of cool. And right now we're kind of doing the circuit. Okay, I have to say this. We did apply to your film festival here, and we didn't get it. But I understand, But eventually, we will have screenings throughout the country. We have host committees in various cities. Eventually, it will probably either be on a streamer and/or PBS. Actually, right now we're trying. If PBS survives, our hope is that it will be on. Sorry, American Agitators. So you can find it at AmericanAgitators.com. And if anybody wants to, I'm happy to share with you a link that you can see it as well. But it's always much better to see it in a theater. And maybe I'll come back next year and we can. Where's Yvette? Maybe I'll come back next year and show it. and, yeah. Oh, I'd love to. So anyway, yes, voting is. I think just. I'm a huge fan. Done in the right way.
Just to add to John, I always think about what Malcolm X said, it's the ballot or the bullet, right? Are we going to use our power at the ballot box, or are we ready to take up some arms, right? I was talking with a grad student yesterday, and they alluded to this. They didn't clearly say this, but we're getting to this place, and we've been at this place, where if we are not exercising our political power, right? I keep saying material conditions, but for us to get material conditions, we must have political power, right? Malcolm X alluded to that, he talked about that, he preached about that, and these are some questions that folks are wrestling with in real time.
Jose, anything on democracy, voting?
All right, I'll try to not be on the soapbox for too long. Voting, obviously, yes, important. But I think one of the challenges with especially our party system, the Democratic Party in particular, is the sort of idea that you just kind of swoop in, you organize people to go vote, and then once the election happens, you just kind of back away. All the emails stop, all the texts. Mercifully, all the texts stop. They stop asking you for money. And I think in some ways it's a really wrong-headed way. And it's not, I don't want to blame the parties. There's been the Citizens United decision, McCain-Feingold. There's been a lot of things that happened in the last 20 years electorally and in the courts that have made it much more difficult for political parties to do 24/7 organizing. But one of the things the Republican Party I think has kind of outworked the Democratic Party at is doing more of this 24/7 organizing, where the party headquarters aren't just for elections, but they're also for organizing communities. If we used to have 100 years ago, we used to have a much richer organizational life. One of the things, if you go read about labor history, like in the 1930s and 1940s, labor unions didn't just ask you for money, right? They had basketball leagues, right? They had civic. They were like, there was just a much richer civic life, a civic organizational life where people were engaged in each other's lives on a more sustained basis. So the political wasn't just about getting in line, which, look, it's incredibly valuable and it is being eroded and it's something that we have to fight for. But that's the beginning, right? That politics is an ongoing affair, and being engaged. And for me, politics is about being engaged in the lives of your neighbors, and broadening who you consider to be part of your community so that it's inclusive, so that it's not just people that look like you or share your upbringing, but that it's that you learn and grow, and that's part of being a human is being political, but in a way of caring about the other, right? So I think we need a deeper think about what does it mean to be political, and maybe our times are forcing us to think more reflectively about politics isn't just a thing that we care about in November, or if we're a little bit more cued into politics, something we care about in off years too. Politics is something that we're thinking about on an ongoing basis, and building community is something that we think about on an ongoing basis.
All right. I am going to channel my friend Sergej Popovich, who couldn't be here today, but we have a couple questions that I think really get to the spirit of how this panel was described on the CWA website, which was, thinking about hope, thinking about the future, and trying to think about positive things that bring us together. And so this question that I like, or at least the most direct form of it, is, where's the protest music? And I think this is a great question, in part because if you read Serge's book, Blueprint for Revolution, that he opens with a story talking about finding himself in this punk band and how inspired he was by other punk bands. And I think about, if I was going to go back in history and explain why am I doing what I'm doing, it's because I happened on a copy of It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back and was like, this Chuck D guy knows something I am not getting in my education courses. And then I wind up listening to Boulder's own Jello Biafra in the Dead Kennedys tell me all kinds of things about what's going on in the world. And so my question is to the panel, and I think we get at this not just in music, but with also art and documentaries. What is the role for these kinds of creative productions in not just making people aware of what's going on in the world, but also bringing people together in community or giving them a way to do something when it feels like other avenues are maybe blocked? Open to all.
Last year I was in a workshop in Arizona around youth democracy work. And there was a workshop that was entitled, Why Did We Stop Singing in the Movement? And that question really hit me like a knife, because I think a lot of the ways in which I got into organizing and advocacy was through protest music, was through the vibe, was through the beat, was through the history of a lot of the reasons why we say and do the things that we say, right? Back on my campus, we had this chant called the holla back, and someone would say holla back, and somebody would respond, I got your back, right? When you are in a place where you feel isolated, where you are less than 3% of the population, the ability to be able to feel solidarity with others is so important. Even chants like Assata Shakur's, it is our duty to fight for our freedom. It is our duty to win. We must love and protect one another. We have nothing to lose but our chains. There are a plethora of other things. And it feels like as things have gotten, I don't want to say more serious or more dire, the hope and the faith and the love of being in community has kind of become a real job, right? Where, you want to get what you need to get done and get out of there as quickly as possible. And so I think part of what we have to do is really bring back this tradition. I think what happens oftentimes in movement is that tradition is lost throughout time, right? Yeah. There is a big gap or sometimes fights that are put, and we're experiencing right now, particularly because there is a large intergenerational gap, right? There are young people who are like, what? I don't want to talk to the elders, right? Because people are always telling me to sit and wait my turn. There are elders who are saying, well, I don't want to work with these young people because they're firefighters or they're seasonal organizers, right? They're here today, they're gone tomorrow. They're working in the community and then they're working on Wall Street, right? There are people who have given and dedicated their lives to this movement for a very, very long time. And I think that we have to recognize that we are more powerful together, and that the only way we're able to pass down these traditions of singing, of chants, of our songs of protest is by making sure that we are building an intergenerational movement and giving that wisdom, but also being able to gain and understand from younger people. My mother always said, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you speak. And that goes to everybody, right? Young people have tons of wisdom and understanding to give, and elders have tons of knowledge and understanding and history that will not be passed on if we are not taking time to understand and hear them.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, I think it's so important to pay homage to the people and the organizations and the work that's been done beforehand. Artistically, I think that it culturally, it adds to the movement, not alone. I mean, I think there are obviously other things that need to be done there, but art and film and books is a critical part of that movement. One of the things that I think social media can play a huge role in that, in terms of embellishing the work of grassroots work and other work that you're doing alone. I have concerns about that. I'd love to, Jose, your discussion about digital media, and I remember a few years ago there was a lot of analysis of what was happening in Arab Spring, and particularly in Cairo, and the use of Facebook, and which was incredible. I mean, it created this revolution, right, where this dictator who had been, how long was he in ruling Egypt, and he was deposed primarily by young people and the use of social media. But I remember going at the same time to a friend of mine who was running a college out in California at the time, and I said, "What is your biggest concern about students today?" And his concern was largely the fact that social media can be used as an excuse not to be more profound in your advocacy. You can write a statement and you don't need to support it, and you send it out to your friends, and you use Instagram and whatever it is, or TikTok, but there's no real kind of substance behind it, and so you lose a lot of that, what I call, and it gets back to the idea of systemic change. And I think in terms of the analysis, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Jose, what happened in Cairo is it wasn't deep, that advocacy. It created this revolution, and they got rid of the guy, but who's in control in Egypt now? So I think there's a real danger in that.
This whole one topic here, this question needs to be its own panel, because you can do a whole hour. Okay, yeah. First of all, yeah, I'm a political scientist because of Chuck D, so I'm with you on public enemy. But yeah, a couple things. One of my favorite. So I hear. So one of the concepts that was, there's a guy, sort of social critic. His name is Evgeny Morozov, and he wrote a book about this concept called slacktivism, right? This idea that, like, activism, what social media allows is the performativity of activism without the actual follow through. You can put, an avatar that shows solidarity with a movement without ever actually putting skin in the game, right? Without doing the actual work, right? You can signal, and I think that's a huge issue in our culture, is that a lot of us signal solidarity without doing the actual work, right? I mean, what's the, you have the, you're a suburbanite with a Black Lives Matter sign in your front yard, but you're going to go to the city council meeting to, protest affordable housing in your community, right? And not calling anybody out in particular, right? So, I mean, I think that's a massive, massive problem. But I do want to, I agree with your colleague on that one, but I do want to, like I said, this is its own panel. I'll try to not be on a soapbox too long with this one either. But I think one of the challenges of the internet age, the social media age, the AI, the coming AI age, is that what algorithms do is that they sort of figure out what you like and they try to give you back to you, right? And what that creates is a kind of regression to the mean, or a regression to the mode, so that artists, rather than sort of leading with creative expression, try to figure out what is it that's going to move me up the algorithm, right? So that my expression will be heard. In the last panel I was in yesterday about journalism and AI, I talked about a journalist who wrote this book about a similar topic, and he talked about how anywhere around the world you go, you're going to find the same coffee shop. It's going to have exposed, vents, and it's going to be open floor plan, and it's going to look very much like a coffee shop in any city in the United States. You go to Istanbul, you're going to find that coffee shop. You go to, I don't know, wherever, Cairo, you're going to find that coffee shop. Why is that? It's because the algorithm Americans go travel, they want to find something that's familiar, or Europeans go travel, they want to find something familiar. It's going to move, right? That coffee shop is going to go move up the algorithm. So this idea of us just sort of succumbing, or at least following the algorithm, makes us sort of modal, makes us normative in ways where we're not as open to new forms of creative expression, right? Things that are challenging us, right? So I think that's what you're getting at with the listening to music, or things that are, you engage in a movement, but then you move on to the next thing very quickly, right? So we're becoming habituated to not want to be challenged, right? And I think that is something that we all have to. There is no easy answer to that. We just have to, like I said yesterday in a panel, it's like if you eat too much fast food, if you eat too much comfort food, it's bad for you, right? If you, everybody needs a day where you just veg out and watch TV all day because you can't. But if you do that for a month, if you do that for a year, that's not good for you. And so I do think that we as individuals have to reflect on how we intentionally challenge ourselves, stretch ourselves, push ourselves, listen to things that are uncomfortable for us, right? We don't have to incorporate it, ingest it all, but we have to make ourselves uncomfortable, right? So, and part of that, that's what sustains movements, right? Is people putting skin in the game, people risking their time, their physical bodies, right? So,
Can I ask you, Jose and John? I've been reading Big Organizing. It's a book by the Bernie Sanders folks. And the question they kind of bring up in that book is, are we asking people to do enough, right? Because people, if you ask them to post a black square, they'll post a black square. If you ask them to sign a petition, they'll sign a petition. You ask them to post something on social media, they'll do that. But those have kind of become the degular means of organizing in this age. And so they ask this question, like, are we asking enough of people to do? Are we asking them to put enough skin in the game? Are we pushing for big ideas, right? Like even in the work I was doing the last 4 years around student debt cancellation is a Band-Aid solution, right? It's not a real solution to the bigger problem, is that the cost of college has consistently gone up and is way too high. So how do we ask people to do more in this moment in time where all they see is social media activism, TikTok activism, put something in my yard sign activism?
So I think one of the ways you can get people to ask to do more is through storytelling and through celebrating these wins that there are out there. Sometimes you think, no, there's no progress whatsoever. I know vis-a-vis what we've been doing in terms of education and dismantling of our public schools as we know them, and the activism that we hear and see from organizations like Moms for Liberty, and that are well funded and well organized and going into communities, and a lot of it, and Jan and I were talking earlier about community organizing, and a lot of it just comes down to these small communities and then allowing it to spread. But that there have been instances where people go into these communities and they support the right people who should be school board members. And it's kind of a David and Goliath thing because on the other side they have funds, they are organized, and they've been wickedly successful in terms of supporting people on their side on the school boards. But there are instances where we see there has been progress and there has been success. So I think it's so critical to be able to tell those success stories, to tell those wins.
Okay, we've got about 8 minutes left. Jose, did you want to comment on that one, or are you all up for?
A lot of questions. I mean, I would say, joy, right? Like, I do feel like I think we've lost a sense of sort of that. Like I'll have students that they start political clubs on campus, and they'll be like, we want to start working for this candidate or doing this work or canvassing, and it's like, well, show movies, have pizza, have fun. Yeah, like you have to build. There has to be a sense of joy and a sense of like, I want to keep coming to this because it's cool. I like these people. These are my friends. I want to support them. I want to have their back. I mean, part of it is like, you have to have a sense of like, this is enjoyable, right? The people I like. These are my friends. These people are cool, right? I like the music. They play good music. The food is good, right? Why is the church or why are religious communities have been such a bedrock of social movements for like the last 100, the whole time of American history? Why have churches been central in movements is because these are places where people come together. They have the little community room afterwards. They have the bean suppers or the hot dish if you're from the Midwest, and people they laugh and they tell stories and they talk about each other's families. And so I think that you can't divorce movement activism from just joy of being, of living, right?
All right, so I'm gonna give y'all a bunch of questions, and we got 6 minutes to get through them. So we've got questions that people would like to know what you all thought of Saturday's hands-off protest. We have other questions that if you're paying attention to what's going on in Serbia, they would like to know what you think of the Serbian student protests and their effectiveness. A number of questions about capitalism, systemic change, and nonviolent movements, and the extent to which nonviolent movements or social movements can be successful under capitalism. And then finally, how should movements respond to escalating factors being used against them, like sound cannons and just more aggressive, militarized policing tactics? All easy questions.
Wow. Wisdom, you're the youngest.
I think I could answer two of those questions, or my thoughts on two of those questions. I think to the last question, in terms of like the escalation of tactics, part of it comes to what I said earlier, training, right? There are tons of really, really great training camps around the country that really, if you are really trying to get into this movement and be prepared to do some of the things that is required for us to win, and do some of the things that are slightly risky or very risky, like flag drops, like being able to evade police and sound cannons, things of that nature. There's some really great training camps out there. Camp Repower, they do a really great training around that to kind of understand field work. There's I'm trying to remember the name of this one. It's in DC as well, but they have a facility where they train organizers on how to do flag drops and how to avoid what to do if somebody is tased, what to do if somebody is gassed, things of that nature. But also recognizing that there's different like levels of escalation to your protests and kind of finding like what you are comfortable with. They talk about like medium, spicy, and like a high level of protests, and basically it kind of coordinates to the way in which you are comfortable with taking action. And so again, if you are going to a protest, one, urge you to be safe, to go with a buddy, to make sure that you understand where your meetup spots are. It is getting dangerous out there, and it has been dangerous out there. And so this is not new, but there is a way in which you can do this. To the point around the hands-off protests this weekend, I know there's been a lot of criticism on social media in terms of like who is showing up to these protests, right? And I think there's a mixed dialogue around the idea of allies showing up in this moment in time to take a bigger stance, because Black folks have been out there in the streets. But also, at the end of the day, right now, this administration is not listening to us, right? We need people to be able to speak up on our behalf. We need people to advocate on our behalf. And it's going to take more than just a march or a protest to change this. It's going to take further advocacy work, meeting with these legislators, pushing for them to do the right thing, and then also calling out the people who are not, right? There are a lot of people who are in positions of power who are not voting in the interest of the people. And there's this conversation brewing right now around the future of the Democratic Party, questions consistently about the rise of a third party. And I think the question that we have to really put at our forefront is, are our leaders truly serving our interests? If they are not, we need to run for something. We need to make sure they're replaced. We need to make sure that we are voting, and we need to make sure that we are turning out folks to ensure that we have better representation in Congress.
Jose, John, can you give a minute response?
No, I mean, I totally agree that the protest is going to hands off was great. I was in New York, and it was an amazing vibe, and I felt great. But here collectively, you have all these people, so what's next? And that's hard if you're not sort of plugged into certain movements and so on and so forth. But I do think there's different gradations of protest. And, I think for me at this level, and maybe this is because I'm 65 years old and a little bit cynical about this, but I'm a huge proponent, obviously, of nonviolent, demonstrations. But you can be more aggressive. I mean, when Michelle Obama said, go low, and when you go low, we go high, I think that did us a huge disservice. I think at the time, for me, it totally registered, but it gave us an out. And at this point in our history, and I'd like to end with this because it's a dark time, but there are a lot of things that we can do. And I think that we need to be more and more aggressive without being violent.
Jose, you got 30 seconds for
you know
us?
what? I just want to build off of what Wisdom said at the end there about running for office. You know, I wonder how many people who were engaged in a protest on Saturday are running for school board, running for city council, running for parks and rec board. You know, a lot of folks, well, they have jobs, and so they don't want to take the time. But if you want to challenge power, become power. And some people are too focused on the national level. But the way that you build up is by, you know, running for these local offices that a lot of times are uncontested, and then a person that you really don't want and doesn't reflect the community winds up winning because nobody else took the time to run against them. So.
All right, everybody, I want you to give a round of applause to our panelists and for all the people at CWA for putting this on and working with us. Thank you for being here, and it's never a bad time to find an MC5 record. So thanks again.